Morning everyone. Today is September 29th and we're working on the Memorial H again. Few updates. In the last video we finished up the governor assembly and I did get a spring in over the week and I installed that without turning the camera on because it's pretty self-explanatory. I already talked about it quite a bit. So we did mount the governor back on the engine. So it's real simple. It's just 2 bolts on the front side and 1 bolt coming from the back side. So that's all you have to do. You don't have to time it to the engine. It just slides into place and meshes with the gear in here. So moving forward, I did pull the entire chassis in here and removed the frame rails off the side. And we've got the front bolster here in the garage on the shelf. So that'll be what we do after we do the water pump. So front bolster is on the shelf ready to go. That's real simple as well. One of the things I always tell people about these bolster to frame rail bolts, so the frame rails bolt right over this section of the bolster using 4 bolts. Be very careful. Most of the time, these bolts, you're going to break probably at least one of them if you don't have a torch especially. I only broke 1. On my M, I broke 5 of 8. So on this one, what I did was before I even tried turning anything, I took and hit the end of each bolt or the head of each bolt just a couple times with a large sledgehammer. And that jolt will sometimes break the rust in there loose. So that's what I did, and I got 7 out of 8 of them out that way. I don't have a torch, so I can't heat this casting to get the bolts out, but that's what I did, and it worked great. We only got to get one of the broken bolts out, so not a big deal there. The front pedestal is here. It's just 4 bolts that hold the front end to the bottom of the bolster. So one of the bolts does have a stop in it. Let's see if I can find it here. This one here. You can see it's kind of got this raised shoulder area up here. That's as a stop so you don't, oversteer one way or the other. So that one will have to go back in the correct position, but we'll cover all that when we do the bolster rebuild. So today we're going to tackle the water pump. I've got my new seals here. Packing, graphite packing, and the bearings in this sound very good. They're not making any noise, so I'm not even going to mess with them. I'll just clean them up, re-grease them, and reassemble it. But let's go ahead and get the camera mounted up in my chest strap and we'll go to work. Okay, first thing we have to do is remove the fan. So in order to do that, we have to remove this mechanism here. I'm not exactly sure what the technical term for it is, but we do have to remove it. Both this nut, and we have to then drive, this is basically a pin here, so we have to drive that pin out because that keeps this assembly from coming off. This center shaft is notched, so we'll grab a hammer. There we go. You can see this pin has a machined flat spot, and that meshes with the notch in the shaft. I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a notch right in the side of the shaft here. So when you reinstall it, that machined portion of the pin has to go into that notch. All right. Don't want to lose my parts here. So that's the fan. Now, we have to remove this packing nut. So I'll get a crescent for that. So there's the packing nut. The impeller pulls out the back side. Try to get some of this dirt off here. Dirt and grease can get packed in some pretty interesting places. Just trying to take a look here. I don't recognize how to... I'm thinking this is threaded. It's been a while since I have torn one of these apart, so... Oh. You'll have to bear with me. I'm gonna have to do some thinking, so... I think the first seal is right here. And the second seal is in the back side of this assembly. So Let me turn the camera off. I'll get this thing mounted in the vise. I'm pretty sure this nut here has to be removed and then the whole hub assembly slides off. So let me get it mounted in the vise and we'll go from there. Okay, so this nut does come off. We got to make sure that we polish this really well and remove any grooves that there might be in it with some emery cloth, because this is what the hub rides on for the front seal. So once we get this nut off, excuse me, you can pull the whole rotating assembly off, and you have a seal here with a bearing, then there's a sleeve in the middle, and another bearing and another seal on the back side. There are also bushings inside this shaft and in the back of here, but I've already slid the impeller back in and it's got literally zero play. So the bushings are in great shape inside here, so we're not even going to mess with those. I'll have to dig all the old packing out of there. You can see it way down in there, so that's what the packing nut makes contact with. So, and we'll repack it with the graphite packing that I've got. But let me clean all this stuff up. I'll get it ready and remove both seals out of here and go from there. All right. All right, guys, we got everything cleaned up as far as the small components go. I've got the hub assembly cleaned up and the water pump casting itself cleaned up. So I also removed the seals. Now these are the original seals. As you can tell, they're pretty much destroyed, but these things are pretty difficult to get out. It takes a lot of prying and demolishing of the seals to get them out. I tried using one of those seal pullers, but they don't work very well for these big thick seals like this. So I removed one of the bearings already from the back side here. Not sure if you guys can see down in there, but there's a bearing here and then a sleeve and then a front bearing. So I'm going to show you how to use a blind hole bearing puller. So essentially it comes in a kit like this, and I got this from Owen. I got to give a big thanks to Owen for the kit. But essentially you insert the tool inside the bearing, you thread the back side of this tool into there and it expands. I'll kind of give you a better idea with this. So when you thread this in, it expands these, I guess you could call them teeth or jaws, and that will open this up, and there's a little lip here, if you can see it, that catches on the inside of that bearing. So once that is complete, you thread on your slide hammer attachment. And then you just, well, it should come out. That one didn't tighten down enough, so we'll have to try it again. It always works negatively in my favor when the camera's rolling. But try it again. Make sure we're through. Probably help if I used a couple of wrenches to get everything where it's supposed to be. It's probably like a 1 inch. we can try again. And sometimes these things are pretty stubborn, so the other side came out no sweat. There we go. So there's our bearing. Now I'll have to put this probably in the vise to get it. Get it loose. And then one thing I always do is just knock it out with a just use a brass punch to knock it out, so, of the bearing. But now we can get the bearings cleaned up, repack them, and start the reassembly with new seals. So as you guys can see, you know, what I've spent on seals and packing, I mean, it's probably less than $20 for new seals and packing. And these water pumps are not that hard to rebuild. It's really not worth, I mean, 95% of the time, unless you have a cracked hub or, you know, a bad bearing that scored the shaft or did something where it caused a catastrophic failure, you know, there's no reason to buy a $150 to $200 water pump when you can just put new seals and repack the bearings. Or even if you had to put new bearings in it, you know, you can get these bearings pretty cheap. So if you just go to a bearing supply shop, you know, these bearings are probably, for two, it's probably less than $20 for two bearings. So even if you had to replace both bearings, you can still save a lot of money rebuilding these water pumps versus buying a new one. So, and there's not much to them. You know, it looks like there's a lot of parts, but you got to remember half of this is bolts. So, oh yeah, these bearings are nice yet. So I'll get these cleaned out and put all new grease in them, and we'll start the reassembly. Okay guys, I've repacked the bearings. As you can see here, basically all I do is I put a big gob of grease in my hand and pack it until you see grease coming through the balls on the top side. So that's that. I installed the bearing on the, let's see, this would be the rear and the seal on the rear. So now we'll flip it over. I'm going to pack grease inside here, and then we got to insert our center tube. I'll grease that up, and then I will insert the bearing and the seal on the rear side. So go ahead and put a big gob of grease inside here, just to kind of give it a head start. And smear it around the best you can. Okay, so there's that. Grease up this center tube. Insert that. And then we can insert our bearing. Now with this, all I do is I grab a big drift or punch, if you want to call it a punch. I call it a drift because it's just a large piece of round stock basically that I use to drive things in or drive things out with. Just drive it down in, and you can tell when it seats because it'll give you a good solid sound. I need a razor blade to cut this package open, or a knife will work. So we put the seal in, and I always kind of get it started as straight as possible, and then I use a block of wood over the seal and just a large mallet. Drive it down until it's flush, and that's that. So the hub has been rebuilt. Now this portion just slides down on there. See, there's some excess grease. We can put that back in the container. And now all we have to do is insert our nut that goes on the front side. That's done. And you always make sure, oh, that's what I didn't do. And I know there's probably plenty of people that are saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. I need to put grease on this nut on the outside because it rides on that seal. Even though there's probably plenty of grease on that seal from being just a nice thin layer of grease. Put that on. There we go. That'll help lubricate and protect the seal. You know what, since we got this off, let me double check to make sure that there's grease on the seal on the back side. See, I always do things 2 or 3 times, you know, just to make sure I did it right the third time. So we'll get this back together and keep on moving. Okay guys, we're gonna keep going with this. We insert our graphite packing. You can get these little packages of graphite packing with probably about 24 inches of rope, basically cotton rope with graphite on it. You just cut a chunk off that's enough to wrap around the shaft and touch ends on the other side, and then you just push it down in there. I use a screwdriver. If I had a thin piece of tubing, that would be great. That would slide over it, over the shaft, but inside the casting. That would be great, but I don't. Whoop. So I'll just use the packing nut to push everything down in place. And I've already done, I think, 5 wraps inside here. So I'll do one where I wrap the rope where the ends touch on this side, and then I stagger it so that the next one, the rope will touch on the other side. The ends will touch on the other side. You just keep doing that, keep staggering them all the way up. And it's kind of trial and error when you repack this. You have to basically put in your packing nut and tighten everything down so that you know how much tension is on the impeller shaft. So you still want to be able to turn it fairly easily. So I'm just tightening everything down here. See, now that's probably pretty good. I'm just going to give it one last little snug, probably about 1/8 of a turn. Yeah, that's real nice. So it's not too tight, but it doesn't spin freely. The reason why I set it a little tight is because it's going to wear in over time. So I've got 6 half moons of rope in here. And that's it. All right, we'll come back to it in a bit. Okay, we've got everything back together as far as the pump assembly goes. Now we got to assemble the fan. So we put the fan on top, put in the 2 hex bolts, and then we have to insert, well, hold on. I shouldn't have tightened these all the way. Remember what I said about doing things 2 or 3 times? See if I can get a socket that is deep enough for these. Oh yeah. So there's that portion. Now we have to make sure that when we line this up, that shaft with the flat notch in it is lined up with the machined portion of the pin. So spring's got to go on first. Just like that. Then you insert your pin. Oh, I gotta start from this side. Just like that. And you install your nut and lock washer. Tighten everything down. Just so it's snug. And there we go. We have ourselves a freshly rebuilt water pump. New seals, new packing. We used the original bearings because they were fine, and most of the time they are. So all we got to do now is put our gasket on and mount it on the engine. So let me get the camera off here. Okay. Welcome back to my face, I guess. That's going to do it for this video. So the water pump rebuild's done. The thermostat housing. All you have to do to install the thermostat is take the top housing portion apart from the bottom. Guess I could show you this real quick. Oh. doesn't make it easy to do one-handed. So there's our top piece. I should have left this thing in my chest mount. Hold on. Okay, so here's the top portion of the thermostat housing. You take your thermostat, slide it down in place, put your gasket on, put the bottom portion in, tighten everything down, and you're good to go. That's all there is. So now we can take the camera back out and say thanks for watching, thanks for wrenching with me, and stay tuned for the next episode, which will be the front bolster rebuild. So I got to do some research before I start on that though. Take care guys, and stay safe.